线长山又高，处处港口都险要。
Hello and welcome back to Straight Talk with Xiangyu, where we dive deep into the Taiwan Strait, a pivotal front line of the battle between Western dominance and Eastern resistance, and between a dying unipolar world and an emerging multipolar order. Today we have a very special guest, one of the most sanctioned political commentators, a people's ambassador of the United States, a divisive figure among American netizens with a new enthusiastic audience here in China, and host of the political show, The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. He is described by right-wing detractors as a treasonous communist bastard, and by baizuo detractors as a fascist, national chauvinist bigot. Your understanding of Jackson might fall under one of these two categories, or perhaps you're not familiar with him at all. Either way, he has a lot of opinions on America's role in foreign affairs, including cross-strait affairs here in China between the mainland and Taiwan. So without further ado, Jackson, why don't you briefly introduce yourself and let the audience know what you're all about?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and congratulations on the new fledgling, flourishing program here. It's very exciting. It's crazy that just being, principally anti-imperialist could rile so many feathers in the American political dilemma that we currently have. I mean, it's like there's really no one that has come about in American politics for decades, especially in the age of the internet, the age of live streaming, who's taken a principled stance of anti-imperialism and especially of being a Marxist, other than myself, Haas, you, and the infrared phenomena. So we are in somewhat of uncharted territories representing these views and doing it in a way that is uncompromising. We refuse to bend the knee to anybody. We refuse to, buddy up with any one political group, be it the right wing, be it the left wing, or whoever else might present themselves. Over the past several years, most of our commentary is focused on the Russia-Ukraine war, which I refer to as a NATO proxy against Russia, covering the events in China from as they relate to foreign policy, such as the developments with the BRICS grouping, the Belt and Road Initiative, issues in the Taiwan Strait, and also issues with Hong Kong and Xinjiang and the crazy allegations, lies about the Uyghur repression there. Also, of course, we have taken it upon ourselves to cover the events in Gaza and the Middle East and Africa, the coups and revolutions that are happening with the Pan-African movement there. So that's primarily what we cover. We do it on less and less platforms because platforms in the United States censor us for telling the truth about these various issues. Of course, we point out the hypocrisies of the United States funding all these wars while our own country suffers and falls apart. The warmongers and the political elite who control big tech, they don't like the fact that we are saying these things, so they censor us, which is why it's so incredible that now I've found a home like so many others on Chinese social media. We launched my Weibo account last week or so, and I think it's already at 50,000 followers, which is, I understand, small fries when you're talking about Chinese audiences, but for an American audience, it's a sizable portion. We have 2.5 million followers on X, which is my last platform here in America, but we are still refusing to compromise to anyone else, and we are staying true to our values.
And I think what sets you apart from other anti-imperialists and communists of the past decades is, for the longest time, I feel that these people have forgotten how to relate to the average Joe anywhere in the world, but especially in America, in the West. And, because of the new left created by the CIA, essentially. But I think what made me just understand where you're coming from is our similar experience of challenging conventional narratives created by the elites for what it means to fight for the interest of, in my case, Taiwan, or in your case, the US. Here in Taiwan, I face accusations from separatists who claim I'm betraying the people for not conforming to their narrow definition of standing up for the people in Taiwan. In America, on the other hand, some consider you to be a suspicious and treasonous foreign agent for simply questioning the status quo of the country. These perceptions are perpetuated by the elites, who create false dichotomies to keep the people divided, a problem that's also plagued Taiwan in various forms for generations. And false dichotomies will be a major theme of today's talk, by the way. For example, in earlier post-war generations, the false dichotomy here in Taiwan was that you either love China, meaning the so-called Republic of China, or you were a communist traitor. But ever since separatists have gained influence, that line of thinking has fallen out of favor and has been replaced with, or should I say, evolved into a newer black and white way of thinking, which is you either love Taiwan and democracy, or you support China and authoritarianism. And notice how they don't say the mainland, which implies Taiwan and the mainland are two parts of one country, but now they say China, implying Taiwan is separate from the concept of China. But the reality is, Taiwan has been fully incorporated into Chinese civilization for 400 years, and for much of the island's existence as a part of Chinese civilization, being anti-mainland was not a part of this island's collective identity. As for anti-communism, Marx wasn't even born until 200 years ago, so anti-communism was obviously not a part of what it meant to be Taiwanese. And I guess this has many parallels with America. Your ancestors, for example, arrived to Massachusetts on the Mayflower 400 years ago, albeit under slightly different circumstances from the Chinese traders, laborers, and pirates who first arrived on this island. And for much of America's existence, anti-communism wasn't part of what it meant to be an American. But because of Cold War politics, in the minds of many Americans, you're either an America-loving patriot or you're a communist. And what's funny to me is a lot of so-called communists in America have adopted this McCarthy outline of thinking as well, but we'll get to that later. You've said you're a communist because you view that only communism can save America. And this gets a similar kind of pushback like I get from Taiwan separatists when I say I am a communist who supports Chinese reunification because only reunification can free Taiwan and allow the people here to truly experience sovereignty, not as an independent Taiwan, but as Chinese people on equal footing with their brothers, sisters, and compatriots on the mainland. So why don't we talk about what it means to be a patriot who serves his compatriots, community, country, and how communism and anti-imperialism are rooted in this patriotism?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to break down there, but I guess we'll start with the fact that communism is about uplifting the standard of living for your country, for your fellow patriots, for your brothers and sisters, for the families that make up this country, for the workers that allow you to be able to live a prosperous life, so on and so forth, right? And as you said, there's nothing fundamentally un-American about that. Of course, all the greatest communist thinkers were for years celebrated all across the world as just that, some of the world's greatest thinkers to ever walked the face of the earth. Many of them even exchanged written correspondence with U.S. leaders like Abraham Lincoln, and they shared ideas with one another. And they of course, shared, these communist thinkers shared lots of sympathies for the American Revolution. Though it was not a proletarian communist revolution, there of course were inspiring and beautiful aspects of it that many of the greatest communist minds appreciated and recognized could be transformative in shaping the United States for what it would become, an economic powerhouse for the world. And also a country that is geographically located in a strategic hub, both East Coast, West Coast, and the potential to also develop our northern trade routes with Russia and other countries as well. So it's very sad to see that somehow, in one way or another, the CIA notion, this McCarthyite notion that communism is anti-American has taken root in American political circles. And again, I say this both on the left and the right in America, because the left in America largely professes a politics of wokeism, focus on cultural issues, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination. The right, on the other hand, focuses on just the opposite. They focus on saying that, racial minorities are bad, or they're actually the problem, or a religious minority is the problem, or something like that. What both failed to comprehend is that it's not any racial minority that's the problem. It's not any religious group that's the problem. Of course, there's going to be patterns and different sorts of practices, customs that come along with any different large group of people. But you have to understand that those phenomena that you can point out in any racial group, religious group, ethnicity, that is not the fundamental problem with our country. That is maybe a byproduct of the problem, and you might view it as a problem, or you might view it as a good thing. Some people say, diversity is our strength. Some people say, no, the diversity is bad. Okay, well, regardless of what you think about the diversity or these people, the problem is that we have finance capital that is governing our country, that is censoring the dissidents and the truth tellers, and is buying up all of the land in our country, buying up all the resources in our country, controlling all of the banks, all of the rapacious forms of profit generation. And they ultimately do not have the best interests of the people at heart. They ultimately represent their own interests above all else. They ultimately will do anything to make more money. And it's just money for the sake of making more money. There's nothing to it. They're already more than rich enough, but it comes with power, and that's what they so deeply desire. So the goal of communists in America, and I guess this is the dichotomy you brought up, is that we say, yes, it actually is patriotic to be a communist, because what is communism? At its core, the way that we like to explain it to Americans in a very simple manner is a movement of the working class, of the people, of the heart, of the soil of this country, that is going to focus on the rapid industrialization of our country at a time when we really need it, while also prioritizing the needs of the people. There's no reason why people like Bill Gates, for example, or BlackRock should own all of the land in this country, all of the farming land in this country, all of the apartments, condos, homes in this country. And the idea, on the other hand, of, say, having land redistribution, for example, is extreme. They call that an extremist position, but having two guys own all the land in the country is not an extremist position in the current, world we live in this country. So I actually think that it is very patriotic. I think there's a rich history of communists in this country. Of course, they don't teach us that in the schools. That is all left out of our textbooks and our history books. And I do believe, yes, it is the only way to free America. And that should be the goal of every American at this point. Free America from finance capital, free America from foreign influence and these foreign meddling schemes that are making all the politicians richer and richer. Free America from big pharma, free America from big tech. Let America flourish and do what it was intended to do, be a nation amongst nations and prosper with the rest of the world rather than at the rest of the world's expense.
Sounds like to me you're saying there is the America of people like George W. Bush or Bill Gates. Then there's the America of people like William Z. Foster or Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X. And this whole divide and conquer thing really just keeps our attention diverted away from what we need to be looking at. It's kind of like over here in Taiwan, because during the KMT dictatorship era, we were governed by a bunch of elites from the mainland because they never re-elected the so-called National Assembly since 1947. So separatists had this idea, the separatists up top knew what they were doing, but they appealed to common folks, misguiding them by saying, all of our problems are here because we are being governed by a bunch of people from the mainland and not local Taiwanese people. But that's changed for ever since the 80s. So, and what's happened? I mean, we were governed by the worst of mainlanders for a few decades. And then ever since the 80s, 90s, we've been governed by the worst of local Taiwanese. What hasn't changed, though, is, the finance capitalists, mostly based in the West, just getting in where they don't belong. So it sounds like to me that you're saying even if many or even the majority of Americans are misled by the ruling class and get some or a lot of things wrong when it comes to politics, at the end of the day, you're still fighting for their liberation by fighting those that are instilling this sort of false consciousness among the people, and that your politics wouldn't really mean anything if they can't be won over. And I want to draw a comparison with China during the chaotic years following the overthrow of the Qing dynasty and before the establishment of the People's Republic of China. During this time, which was between 1912 and 1949, China was nominally under the control of the Republic of China, but in reality, it was in a state of disunity and was ruled by a bunch of warlords. And at one point, there were two political entities that both called themselves the Republic of China until the KMT, which was based in Guangzhou at the time, defeated the Beiyang government that was based in Beijing. So, as you can imagine, the state of China back then was terrible, much more terrible than what the urban decay and stuff like that you're seeing in America right now. And a lot of peasants who desired nothing more than a semblance of stability attributed the chaos to the lack of an emperor, because they're thinking, oh, back in the day when we had some stability, there was an emperor, now there's no emperor and everything's a mess. I mean, these people were obviously not correct in their assessment of the situation, but they were definitely right for recognizing the problems in society and for wanting society to change for the better. Now, before Mao Zedong became the undisputed leader of the Communist Party of China, there were lots of nerdy intellectuals who had studied abroad in the Soviet Union and thought they knew better than the Chinese people. And they kind of scoffed at the idea of letting those backwards peasants join the revolution. But as history would show us, many of those peasants joined the revolution and in fact became its backbone, meaning the communists would not have been successful without the active support of the enthusiastic peasants and at least the non-hostility of the majority of the rest. So when I see the way Western liberals and many self-identified communists conduct themselves, it reminds me of the elitist Chinese communists who look down on the peasants for not having a fancy education and for drawing wrong conclusions from their observations, like you saying, some of the right-wingers blaming diversity or blaming immigrants, while other people are saying, oh, it's because we don't have enough diversity, when that's really not the entire picture. And it's really, in a lot of cases, it's a distraction used to divide the people. I mean, their attitude reminds me of, just imagine if Chinese communists back then, instead of going to the countryside and proving to them that they're serving the people, they just went and pointed fingers at them who were just trying to get by and yelled at them for being advocates of feudal restoration, instead of first just hearing them out and just talking to them on their level. Like, do you think this is a fair comparison? And if so, how are you setting yourself apart from those types of communists, so-called communists? And what do you think the results so far have been like?
Well, I think that you talk about the era of, warlordism before Mao rose to his position in the party. And it was really interesting when I was in China, because we went to the first, what was the name of the building? Is it the first Comintern or something like that? Or the first CPC National Meeting Building?
In Shanghai, right?
Yeah, in Shanghai. And we learned about all of that, and I was in the museum, and you got to see all the photos, the statues, and read all the texts about it, and hear all the stories. And I was there with people who are very informed on all this history, so they were sharing more personal stories about it all, and it did make me think about America. Not necessarily right now, but I think where we are very soon going to be headed. It's America's almost in that position, I think. And of course, it's not that bad yet, like you mentioned. But it is almost a certainty at this point that I think there are 24 various ways in which we could get to that sort of point within the next 10 years or so, maybe less, right? People talk about, potential, civil war breaking out if Trump is withheld from, ascending to the presidency once more, because many Americans feel as though it is a sure thing that he will win unless someone or a group of people nefariously prevent him from doing so by withholding votes or stealing an election, for example. When it comes to Trump, if he were to get elected, for example, and there is no big fight over his election, I'd imagine they will try to remove him from office. Trump is a symbolic figure for a lot of Americans. It's not to say that I think he's perfect or even 90% of the way there and what I would want in a leader, but he is a symbol for a lot of Americans, patriots, and even if you can believe it, he is a sense of stability in American politics right now, because Joe Biden, as much as he was presented to everyone as a statesman of stability, given the fact that he's had so many years in Washington, D.C., in the U.S. Senate, as the vice president, he has now launched a Sitzkrieg, a war before the war, basically tipping off World War III with the Russians. We've got the Gaza situation going on. And also, as we all know, he has been very hawkish on the question of Taiwan and China. So there's that. They could remove Trump from office. But then you also have the question of what comes after Trump. Does Trump try to seek a third term? And does he try to change the Constitution? That's a possibility. Could that create problems? Yeah. Do I think that's necessarily wrong of him to do? No, but I think it could cause problems. If Trump doesn't seek a third term, what would happen? Who would fill the void? Well, you're going to begin to develop all these sorts of different political factions that intuitively are going to be gaining more power because they're going to be trying to fill the void of that symbol of Trump when he's gone. So it's really a crazy time for us in America. As for your question about what we as communists, myself, Infrared, Hazaldin, what we are all doing to try and distinguish ourselves from the sorts of social chauvinists and who have this bourgeois mentality that they have to tell the working class what is right and what is wrong. We're open-minded, not too open-minded that our brains fall out, but we're open-minded in the sense that we are welcoming to all. It doesn't mean that we trust everyone. It doesn't mean that we are going to say, okay, you have different views than us, you can come help us, lead our organization. But it means that we're willing to break bread with everyone. We're willing to talk to everyone. We're willing to not ostracize any one person in the American working class based on whether or not they have views X, Y, or Z about gay people or about a racial group or whatever it may be, right? There's a lot of people who on February 24th, 2022, when the SMO in Ukraine started, there's a lot of regular Americans who really hated Russians on that day and were hating Russians for months on end thereafter. And slowly but surely, people begin to look at all the information that was being shared online. They're like, wait, Russians aren't our enemies. Russians are actually kind of like us. We're both bastard children of Europe. We've both gone abroad and sought to create our own empires. It's like we're cowboys and Cossacks. We are similar. So I think that when you talk to people, when you can learn from people, when you can also expose people to new ideas, there's a lot to be gained from that. The American political left today, who embodies this sort of Nordic-style social democracy, they are the glasses-wearing elitists that went to like Columbia University or NYU or Brown University. These are very liberal, high-level elite institutions and universities in the United States. And they are so disassociated from the American people. They are so out of touch with the American people. One phenomenon that's been really interesting is that our group of people has empowered this sort of meme called MAGA communism. And MAGA communism, it is a dichotomy, as we mentioned at the start. That's going to be a theme of our conversation. But the truth of the matter is, people hear MAGA and communism, they think those things don't really go together. But actually, if you talk to MAGA voters, the bread and butter, the meat and potatoes of the Make America Great Again movement, the supporters of Trump, a lot of them support communist policies. They want to free America. They want to industrialize this country. They don't want it sold off to big oligopolies and oligarchs. They want it for their own. This is their country. They want a stake in what is so beautiful about it. So that is something that we've popularized. It's drawn a lot of attention, and it's caused a lot of people to inquire about communism and what it really is, who otherwise, I think, wouldn't have necessarily expressed any interest.
I think the loudest opponents to MAGA communism are the people who reduce essence to form. They're like the people who say, well, East German military uniforms look a lot like the Nazi uniforms, so they must be the successors to Nazis, whereas West Germany got new style uniforms and stopped goose marching, so they're democratic like us. And I think a huge problem is these people just quickly judge people for who or what they support on the surface level. But I think instead of doing that, we should not judge people for who they support or what they support, because, everybody's had a different background, a different education, different understanding of the world. But if we just get to their level and try to understand why they have the positions they do, more often than not, you're going to find a lot of common ground, unless you're talking to some son of a multi-billionaire. I don't think there's going to be too much in common. And hopefully before things get as bad as you described earlier on, the situation, you guys can intervene, or the situation is fixed quickly if it gets that bad. And when you talked about the power vacuum, power vacuums are very scary in politics. That's a fact that I don't think people understand. You look at countries being overthrown. Why do they become so chaotic? Because nothing fills the void. So things spontaneously pop up, and there are a lot of times they're like drug cartels or stuff like that. And when it comes to strongmen, I think for a lot of these people, they want to be able to have a leader that they can respect, kind of like how the Soviets had Stalin, or how the people on mainland China have Xi Jinping today, or they had Mao Zedong in the past, or how the Korean people have the Kim family. There's comfort, whether or not we want to admit it or not, to know that there is this sort of figure out there that's looking out after us. Why was Roosevelt so popular in America? I guess it's kind of divisive now, but during his time, during his, 3.5 terms or 4 terms, he was quite popular. But as soon as he passed, what path did America go on with Truman, for example? Yeah, on the topic of false dichotomies and black and white thinking, though, I think people have this understanding that liberals are on the left and conservatives are on the right. And so to be a communist, which is also on the left, you have to be a liberal, but to a greater extreme. And this is what right-wingers believe, and it's also why a lot of the people you speak of who say they support communist policies, but they don't like the word communism, that's kind of why they're against this stuff, because they deal with normal radical liberals and they find these people to be repulsive and to go against the sensitivities of the average working man. And unfortunately, like we said before, a bunch of self-described communists have adopted this worldview. But if we think about it dialectically, the unity of opposites and all that, and this kind of is related to the whole MAGA communism thing and conservatism and liberalism, wouldn't you agree that tradition gives context and meaning to progress? And doesn't progress exist to keep tradition alive while adapting tradition to ever-changing times? I'm sure during your most recent trip here to China, you saw a lot of that. I know among a lot of anti-China people, there's this perception that real Chinese culture was preserved in Taiwan, whereas the CPC destroyed Chinese culture during the Cultural Revolution. But you saw Chinese culture in Shanghai, didn't you?
Of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, these perceptions are based off of extreme actions of overzealous Red Guards taking matters into their own hands. Not to mention that, a lot of the restoration of the Great Wall or the uncovering of the Terracotta Army in Xi'an happened during the Cultural Revolution. And also, the Cultural Revolution has been criticized by the Communist Party as a mistaken policy and a chaotic time period ever since the late 1970s. So I think you having witnessed this, it's quite apparent that the Communist Party of China is the greatest defender of Chinese civilizational culture today. And if you read their propaganda posters, they basically sell socialism by tying the party goals and the core values of socialism to Chinese tradition, Chinese culture, that sort of stuff that people hold dearly to their hearts. I mean, I guess it could be argued that Chinese civilizational culture was protected by the KMT in Taiwan until the political and economic liberalization of the 1990s. But ever since then, organic traditional culture is being eroded here, top down by civil society institutions like the Ford Foundation that tout so-called, universal values, and with Taiwan separatism as an ideology spreading historical nihilism, making younger generations far less interested in maintaining their civilizational culture. I mean, meanwhile, though, interestingly, I don't think a lot of like the baizuo will understand this. The people here in Taiwan who are pro-reunification and more critical of U.S. foreign policy tend to be more culturally conservative. Then, of course, I mean, there's going to be separatists who are right-leaning, but they're kind of like JQers in the West. Aside from form, they don't really differ too much from baizuo when it comes to the objective role they play in society. It's kind of like how grapers in America serve the same ends as baizuo, even if they don't realize it. So I guess you could say you're a conservative, but you're also not a conservative as understood by Americans. And since you're a communist, you objectively push for progress. But you're not a progressive as the term is understood in America. When you say only communism can save America, what do you mean by this, and how does this uphold the American tradition while also progressing America to a better future? I know some of this was answered in your previous answer to the previous question, but I feel like maybe you want to expand on that a little bit?
No, yeah. Yeah, I think you brought up the topic of, strongman figures in politics. And obviously that's, I think of it like a father figure. That should be the goal of a good leader. What do fathers do? They raise their children. They protect their family. They provide a path for your family to go down, and it should be prosperous and it should be safe and whatnot. And whenever a fight starts between siblings, or maybe a marital fight or whatever it may be, you as the man have to be the rock, and you have to stabilize things. So that should be the goal of every leader. And when you look at communists within America, you do have these two sides of the same coin. In America, you have the left, you have the right, this liberal group, and then you have this right-wing group. The right wing maybe embodies some of the patriotic tradition that we love, but they also, in large part, I don't want to say all right-wingers, but those in power represent the interests of the ruling elites, the finance capital. And those on the left side, it's the same thing. It's like, well, maybe they talk some good talk about how we need to uplift the standard of living for the people in this country, but it's all talk. They don't do anything. It's all fake, and all they ever do is push these horrendous policies down our throats about, racism or about like these woke values. It doesn't actually change the lives of the American people who are suffering at all. It would be like, it just doesn't help. So the idea is that we as communists have to serve as that father figure for America. We are not left, we're not right. We draw our own line down the center, and we say that, yes, this is the path for us to live down. This is the stable path. This is the safe path for us to go down. Yes, this is the prosperous path for us to go down. We see that, the elite have the left and right fighting like siblings, right? They have them fighting and squabbling over these petty disagreements. Distractions is all they are. We need to unite this country. That's what communists aim to do. And also to bring about peace worldwide. That's the other thing. Stop the fighting worldwide. Stop all this illegal intervention and focus on ourselves. So, that's the goal of it. And I think that communists are the only ones who are uniquely positioned to do that. It literally is impossible for a right wing to do it. It is literally impossible for a left wing to do it, the liberals to do it. And that leaves us, and we are the only ones who are thinking about it scientifically, about how to solve these problems, how to address human life in the United States, how to develop with the rest of the world. So that's why I think communism is the only thing that can truly save America.
So it sounds like you're saying Republicans and Democrats are both like bad, negligent fathers who are out there gambling and whoring and being careless with the family's money, and they're raising their kids to be broken and incomplete and without a rock. It's kind of like Democrats, like the supporters of Democrats, are kind of progressive for the sake of being progressive and not being tied down to traditional values that make sense, that give meaning to the progress. And the conservatives are pushing back against that, and they're being conservative for the sake of being conservative, but they're also not tied down to progress that enables their traditions to survive in a world that's never static. It's always changing. I mean, that's a fair assessment.
100%. You put it very well.
Yeah, and when you talk about an America that coexists peacefully with other countries, that works together, I mean, I think a common criticism is, well, that's America has been, ever since the end of World War II, has always been a source of evil and blah, 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 blah. But I feel like from what you're saying is there's the America of the people, the one that you want to see thrive and you want to save. Then there's the America of the elites. There's a nascent civilization that's gone through trials and tribulations, and a group of elites from very aristocratic families and tied with oil monopolies and Wall Street, some even, going as far back as the royal family in England. And, there's an America that unfortunately engaged in the slave trade, but there's also an America that fought what's commonly called the Second American Revolution to end slavery. There's an America that funded Hitler's rise and America that joined forces with the Soviet Union to defeat Nazi Germany. So it goes without saying that when you say America first and America only, it means something totally different from the America first pursued by the establishment, which a lot of times means Zelensky first, Israel first, or whatever. And that the establishment uses that slogan to appeal to people with these sorts of sensitivities that are common throughout the country, kind of like the way that Democrats may preach diversity and inclusion to appeal to Americans from minority backgrounds. But their diversity and inclusion stops at the phenotypic level, and the diversity of ideas is actively discouraged. And therefore, we see a division being sowed by both the establishment's version of America first, as well as its version of diversity and inclusion. And I think it's because a lot of people, including self-proclaimed communists, get caught up in this dichotomy of conservatism versus progress, that they think you're some sort of national chauvinist because you say you're America first. Could you explain what your idea of America first is and whether or not it is compatible with internationalism?
Yeah. So I think we'll start off with the fact, I think you brought up some good points about the fact that you have two Americas, right? You have the America that benefits from all these imperialist ventures, just like in the same way they benefit from the horrendous policies that they promote in the United States. And then you have the America, which is the heart of this country, that says, why are we having all these wars? How does this benefit us? How does Think about this. The U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion on our military every year. That's insane. That's like 50 cents of every dollar, about half of every dollar that we're taxed is going to the military. Now, you'd think if that was the case, we would have the most glorious, best, strongest, most equipped military on the face of the earth. But guess what we don't have? We don't have hypersonic missiles. Guess who does have hypersonic missiles? Russia. Korea, the DPRK, developed their first intermediate range hypersonic missile this week. I mean, it's like we don't have anything. And we definitely can't win our wars. We can't defeat the Taliban after 20 years. We can't defeat Russia. We definitely can't take on China. It would be a fool's mission. So what I think is, you have these two Americas. One America that is making all this money off of the military-industrial complex and those wars. And that's been our history from the start of it all. You've had one portion of this country that is captured. Even before we were a country, during the colonies, you had all of these, vying centers of power in the colonies. There were some in the colonies, the bravest men who wanted to have a sovereign nation that was not controlled by the crown. They were trying to push for more sovereignty in the ports, for trade, for our major imports and exports. They were trying to push for further Western development. They were trying to push for sovereign militias. And there were other centers of power in the colonies who were doing the bidding of the United Kingdom and were fighting tooth and nail against all of these various efforts that were led by the patriotic communists. And what's so interesting about that story is that those colonists that were controlled by the United Kingdom were actually paying Native Americans to go into the patriotic colonies, and they would massacre these colonists. They would massacre their families. It's obviously a horrendous history what happened with the Native Americans in this country, but looking at that specific time was so unique because you had Americans, colonists at that time, colonists who were weaponizing the indigenous population to massacre other colonists. I mean, that's essentially, that's like the historical iteration of what we're now experiencing in this country. We've got all these people dying of fentanyl overdoses. We got people dying because we don't have health care. We got people dying because they're being sent into these foreign wars. That is the same exact thing. We're having this class of finance capital that is killing Americans just to make a quick buck, just to keep their system of power in order. So I definitely agree with you that the American people, they don't want any of this. 36% of Americans, that sounds like a lot, but it's actually a record low. Only 36% of Americans support Israel. Usually that number's up to 70, 80% in the United States support Israel. Right now it's down to 36%. The majority of Americans do not support sending any more aid to Ukraine. If you were to poll the American people, question them as to whether or not they support war with Russia, that number would be even lower. It would be like very small people would want war with Russia. Now, there's a lot of propaganda about China, so I am hesitant to say the same about if the American people were asked about war with China, but maybe they don't like China. But I know they don't want to send their daughters and their sons to go and fight a war over semiconductor chip production in Taiwan. That's just, it's not a thing. I've never met anyone. I meet thousands and thousands and thousands of people each and every year. I've never met a single American who said, well, Jackson, I agree with you on a lot of things, but, I think you get this whole thing about China wrong. We should definitely start a war with them over semiconductor chip production. No one believes that. No one wants that. The only people who want that, CIA, all these political think tanks that stand to make money, the mainstream media, those are the only ones that want this. And the last thing I'll say is you brought up the historical examples of what the American people have done not what they want, what they've done versus what the capitalist class has done. You brought up specifically World War II, how the capitalist Western finance capital funded the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, and how eventually, the United States, the people of the United States, who were convinced by Lyudmila Pavlichenko, Soviet sniper, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wife, to go and fight. They did do that. They went and fight. My grandfathers fought in World War II against the Nazis, hand in hand with the Red Army soldiers. Take a look at Russia. This is so interesting. The U.S. government tells us to hate Russia, has convinced, or did convince, a lot of Americans to hate Russia, 2 years ago. But what has Russia done for us, or what have they done to us? Well, they really haven't done anything to us. I mean, you could talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but obviously we know what sparked that. It was the anti-communist imperialist sentiments of those in the deep state. But what really has Russia done for us? Well, they helped us win the American Revolution. They supported us then. And the War of 1812, when the British came and burned down the White House and were launching a war on the Great Lakes in the north of the United States, the Russians supported us then, and they actually brokered a truce. You look at World War II, of course, we fought hand in hand there. You look at when the USS Liberty was bombed by Israel. Guess who the first ship that showed up was when they came to try and save those that were on the ship? It was a Russian ship. You look at 9/11, horrific terror attack. Who was the first country that called the United States on 9/11? It was Russia. So really, Russia's painted out to be this boogeyman, but the American people know that they're actually not. They're a friend. They're our ally. Same with China. There's no reason to hate each other. They're just being misled.
Yeah. And I think with more conversations like these, people will understand that the same people who lied to them about Russia and earlier on about Afghanistan, Iraq, and the weapons of mass destruction are the same people who are telling them to hate this country on the other side of the world that really just wants to be left alone. And I think a really interesting thing that conclusion from some of these things that you mentioned is the elite's America cannot survive without the people's America. But the people's America can do even better without the parasitic elite's America holding back progress. And the thing about the whole profits for the sake of profit, power for the sake of power is they understand it because it benefits them. But to the average American, I mean, most people want meaning in their lives. You go out to war, you want to know what you're fighting for. But you talk to a lot of people, like some Korean War, Vietnam War veterans. You ask them, what was the war about? Especially in the Korean War, they're like, I don't know what it was about. We went and we massacred villages and we ended up where we started. Risked our lives every day. A lot of my buddies got killed. But you talk to the Chinese soldiers who joined the Korean War, or the Korean people in the Korean People's Army, why they fought the war. Even if they were illiterate and uneducated, the answer was really simple. We're fighting to defend our hard-earned sovereignty and dignity and independence, and we're defending our homeland, So speaking of the whole tax dollar thing, like half of the money going to the U.S. military, that doesn't serve a mission that makes sense to the average American. It makes sense that you're against so-called U.S. support for Taiwan, especially, earlier this year there was this recently passed defense spending bill, and there were Taiwan provisions in it, which include no less than $300 million in free military aid to Taiwan under the U.S. Foreign Military Financing Program, more than $26 million for cooperative programs by the Department of Defense, which should be defending America, not supporting other militaries. I don't understand that. No less than $4 million for projects under the umbrella of the Taiwan-U.S. Global Cooperation and Training Framework. So, the thing is, before the passage of this bill, the U.S. government, for all intents and purposes, strong-armed the people in Taiwan into buying outdated weapons, which has actually been criticized by peace advocates here in Taiwan because the arms sales create tensions with the mainland, and once we get the weapons, they're not even effective for warding off the PLA. Let me just share some statistics over here. And these are actually outdated statistics. The statistics now are even more unfavorable for Taiwan. Mainland China's WS-2 missile costs $10,000 to produce, $10,000, whereas a single Patriot missile costs Taiwan $3 million US. It takes 3 Patriot missiles to intercept the WS-2, which means it costs $9 million to intercept a missile that costs $10,000. Then there's the HN series of land attack cruise missiles, capable of attacking from an altitude of only 10 to 30 meters, whereas Patriot missiles operate at 50 meters and above, so you do the math. And where do you think the money comes from? I mean, what's especially infuriating is how $50 million US was sent in aid to Israel by the administration here. And when we had that big earthquake earlier this week, the Ministry of Health and Welfare was accepting donations from the people. And it goes to show how the people here are great people who are willing to lend a hand when others are in need. But haven't the people here already paid for these emergencies already through our tax dollars? I mean, why should Israel be getting money from us? And why should we be paying for weapons from the US when we're being used as guard dogs against the mainland? I mean, I'm not saying that we should be getting weapons from the US at all or for free, but I'm saying if the US is going to use the people here as human shields, I mean, they should just stop using the people here as human shields for US geopolitical interests that don't benefit the people here or in the US for the matter. Now, I mean, there are people who benefit from this arrangement, and they say that although these arms cannot effectively defend Taiwan from mainland attacks, it demonstrates Taiwan's willingness and determination to self-defense. But thing is, you look at the Taiwan Relations Act, which, by the way, is not a bilateral law. It's a unilateral law, a domestic U.S. policy, which is ridiculous because why should a domestic policy have anything to do with any territory abroad? It does not say that the U.S. is obligated to defend Taiwan in the event of a war. All it says is that efforts to determine Taiwan's status by non-peaceful means are matters of grave concern. And we've seen how Ukrainian lives were supposedly a grave concern to the U.S. by using them as attack dogs against Russia and then hanging them out to dry. So basically the people in America and Taiwan are both getting played. And what I like to tell the people here is that the same government that leaves the American people grossly neglected is the same government that we're told is our friend with shared values. And I think the people over here in Taiwan and the American people should surely be friends. But the friendship the authorities here speak of is really friendship between the elites and their stooges. Which brings me to the next point I want to discuss. A while back, I think it was on Propaganda & Co., you were asked about whether or not you support Taiwan separatism or something along those lines. And you give an answer that I think is the best way to describe the situation. You said something along the lines of how Taiwan separatism was designed by the U.S. deep state as a tool to maintain its geopolitical interests in this region. Could you get into how you arrived at this conclusion? Because it's kind of rare for a lot of younger Americans to arrive at that conclusion, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you and your audience know the history of Taiwan specifically far better than I could recite, but I'll say generally, Balkanization is a weapon of diplomatic war that the United States has embarked upon for many years that has been very successful, or would be successful if they could actually achieve it in the case of China or Russia. Of course, you know, to a certain extent, they did achieve it with Russia, but with the Soviet Union. So this idea is that, okay, you have country number one, right? And country number one is a strong country. It is a unified country. Maybe not everywhere is perfect. Maybe there's some disgruntled populations in certain regions, some small minorities that are upset with the current ruling party or whatever. But overall, the country is happy, it is stable, it is prosperous, and it is diverse. The United States comes in, says, "Oh, we don't like the fact that this country is getting so big. We don't like the country that this country is getting so economically prosperous and could potentially pose a challenge to us, pose a challenge to the dollar, pose a challenge to the IMF or the World Bank and the loans that we hand out, these rapacious loans that just completely rape countries who are trying to develop their vital interests. We don't like the fact that this country is building up its military. We don't like so on and so forth. So the United States comes in and says, how do we weaken this country that could pose a challenge to us? Well, we see that, let's take Russia, for example. They look at Russia and they say, well, you got these Chechens, and we could exploit some of the grievances of the Chechens, or we could even import some of the more extremist Chechens that we've used in wars elsewhere across the world, and we can send them there to go and spark a color revolution and start a war against the Russian government. Okay, they did that. Russia won, but that's what they did. And people died as a process. It was very sad, but the CIA were the ones who did that. Same thing with Taiwan. They see and they know. The United States knows this, as you said at the start of our conversation. Taiwan does, I believe the stats are still this, but last time I checked, Taiwan does most of their trade with mainland China. So Taiwan would benefit immensely from being formally integrated completely, a complete reunification with the mainland. So the idea that the United States says, oh, we support freedom, democracy, and the people of Taiwan, so we need to break it apart. No, what are you talking about? They just know that doing that, breaking it apart, declaring Taiwan independence would hurt China. It would create division. It would force China to have to militarily respond to this. People would die, just like they've died in Ukraine. You know how sickening it is that you have these anti-human satanic scum in the United States that are sitting in the State Department, sitting in Langley, Virginia, and they're calling upon these narratives of democracy, freedom, human rights, as they send 450,000, probably north of 500,000 men and women to their deaths fighting this Nazi venture against the Russians. 150,000 Russians are dead too. Nothing boils my blood more than that, to know that there's all these people being conscripted. Now they're conscripting men as young as 25 years old forcibly. They're being forced into the front. You've got kids 16 years old being sent to the front who are dying for what? For this stupid effort to balkanize Russia, because they think that, well, yeah, of course, the Donbass residents would benefit if they joined the Russian Federation. They'd benefit economically. Their standard of living would increase. We're already seeing that. I talked to these people. I just went to Russia. I talked to these people in the Donbass. They're like, yeah, we're happier now. We don't live under shelling as much. They're building new buildings, new factories. Previously, all of the infrastructure was from the Soviet Union. Ukraine waves their flag around and says, we want to do decommunization. But all of the ports, all of the construction equipment, everything that is related to infrastructure was from the Soviet Union in this region. Russia's coming in and saving these people. So long story short, I get upset when I talk about that, but it is so crazy what they're doing. 450,000 dead. That's just an insane number. And that's why I care so much about this Taiwan situation, because I know that the 450,000 dead in Ukraine is going to look like a cakewalk compared to what's going to happen in Taiwan. What are we going to do in Taiwan? I talked to Colonel Douglas McGregor a while ago about this, who is Donald Trump's former senior advisor to the Pentagon. And I said, Colonel, doesn't seem like going to war with China is all that great of an idea. The PLA seemed like a bunch of bad dudes that I wouldn't really want to mess with. You see those promotional videos. It's frightening. We've got this transgender military in the United States. The PLA, I would not want to mess around with them. And I said, this doesn't seem like a good idea. We're witnessing, okay, America lost a 20-year war to the Taliban. America is losing already 26% of Ukrainian territory to Russia, and they've lost way more men in this proxy war. We just told Yemen that we were going to come in and stop them, the Houthis, the poorest people in all the Middle East. We told them we were going to stop them from blockading the Red Sea. We amassed a 10-country naval joint military operation to do that. And guess what? We failed. The Houthis have targeted 86 ships associated with Israel. They still blockaded the Red Sea. They allow Russian and Chinese ships to go through because they're friendly with them, but they don't allow any Western ships to go through. It's cost the global economy, the West, billions of dollars. It's cost Israel billions of dollars. So I don't think this would be a good idea to go to war with China when we're losing all these wars. And he said, of course it's a bad idea. He said, Jackson, it'd be the dumbest idea that anyone could ever think up. He's like, it is a fundamentally stupid venture. What are we going to do? We're going to send some of our old, rusting, naval fleet to Taiwan. We'll surround Taiwan and then they'll sink our ships and hopefully we can get a few of them back to the United States before they sink those too. Like, what are we going to do? Okay, so obviously we can't do anything. So what are the people of Taiwan going to do? Well, they're going to fight, as you said, a quote-unquote noble mission, just like they talk about the Ukrainians. Oh, yeah, they're putting up a good fight. They're doing their patriotic duty. But what does that really mean? It means that they're serving the interests as a proxy of the United States, as a proxy of the CIA, and a complex game of geopolitical chess, and they are going to be killed in a suicide mission. So all in all, that's the goal of the United States: balkanize, divide, chaos, and death and misery, and just anti-human satanic policies. So we need to bring an end to that.
Well, hopefully the saying I'm about to tell you will make you a little bit more optimistic about the situation in Taiwan, which is some people here say the people who had the balls to revolt were already killed off by the Japanese. So the rest of the people and their descendants today are probably just going to surrender. But in such a situation, because, the military here is having trouble recruiting people, which is why they extended conscription back to 1 year for those born in 2005 and after. Whereas on the mainland, you know what the situation's like. You can sign up, you can, be physically fit enough, you can pass all of their requirements, but you may not get in because there's simply more applicants than there are availabilities.
Really?
Yeah, so what does that tell you about the will of the people here to fight? When I was doing my service, it was in central Taiwan. It was in a rural area, and people there are a little bit more traditional in their worldviews. And when I went to buy chicken over there, it was roasted chicken. You got to try it if you come here. I was just talking to the owner of the restaurant, and he was like, "Oh, you're doing your service?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was just talking about military service in general. I mean, I wasn't military, but I guess conscription, military, it goes hand in hand. And he says that he's worried that the leader over here, Tsai Ing-wen's gonna become the next Zelensky. So then I just wanted to kind of test the waters and see how he'd react. So I said, Zelensky's a traitorous bastard who's selling out his people. And he was like, exactly. And he was like, that's what I'm worried about the government here becoming. I mean, ideally, like you said, in the world of Western hegemony, the ideal country is, if it's big, would be like India, which is big but weak and can easily be influenced. Now, with what you said earlier, it was all correct, but I kind of want to share more information for my audience, but also to you, so if people press harder on you in the future in these sorts of discussions, you'll be better equipped to fight back, which is when World War II ended and Japan surrendered its colonies and gave territories that it took from China back to China, the U.S. did not question whether or not Taiwan was a part of China. But when the writing was on the wall and it became apparent that Chiang Kai-shek would lose control over the mainland, the U.S. government started bouncing ideas back and forth as to how to deal with Taiwan, with the bottom line being not letting communists gain control of Taiwan. And as you know, the People's Republic of China was established on October 1st, 1949. But even before then, and this is ridiculous, even before then, all the way back in February that year, then Secretary of State Acheson sent a diplomat named Livingston T. Merchant to Taiwan to meet with the provincial governor, Chen Cheng, to see if he'd be willing to declare his provincial government separate from the central government and promised the U.S. to not engage with communists. And in return, he'd get $25 million in annual aid. Then the Allied forces would come and occupy Taiwan, then organize a new government, and the U.S. would send its Navy and Air Force to the Taiwan Strait to prevent an attack. And the idea was, once Chiang Kai-shek lost the mainland, instead of retreating to Taiwan as the final territory of China still under his control, he'd have to come here to a Taiwan that's no longer a part of China as a political refugee and lose all of his political power. So as you can see, the deep state thought up all sorts of ideas to keep the two sides separated. And, this is really disgusting to think of, but they even entertained the idea of giving Taiwan back to Japan, which had just been colonized by them for 50 years. The U.S. was ready to abandon Chiang Kai-shek, but when the Korean War began, the deep state decided he'd be the best candidate for keeping communism out of Taiwan. So they reluctantly supported him, but they still tried to oust him a few times, which is kind of funny. But they and then they purposely left China, which at the time it was contentious which government was legitimate, but they just decided to leave both Taipei and Beijing out of the Treaty of San Francisco, where the final peace settlements were made with Japan, so they could argue that Japan had only surrendered Taiwan and hadn't formally given it back to China. And I don't know if you know this, but expressing separatist sentiments in Taiwan used to land you in jail. And this was the case all the way up until the 1980s, because separatism began as opposition against the KMT. For more information on this, listeners can check out the previous episode. And for the meat and potatoes, you can check out the Taiwan history series that I did with Carl Zha on his Silk and Steel podcast. Links in the description. Anyways, at this time, the U.S. began covertly supporting the separatists while overtly supporting Chiang Kai-shek as controlled opposition to make him more cooperative. And because separatism was illegal back then, most of them operated in exile. First, it was mostly in Japan with a fake provisional government of the Republic of Taiwan that incidentally had more Japanese than Taiwanese people in it. Go figure. Then the activity shifted more to America. So what we see now and what we collectively call the Taiwan lobby today is sort of a hybrid successor of the KMT and Taiwan separatist lobbies that stood opposed to one another back in the day. Anyways, when martial law and the ban on oppositional parties were lifted in the late 1980s, these separatists in exile came back to Taiwan and entered government. So the KMT government on Taiwan was basically soil. The separatists were seeds. And the U.S. basically figured, hey, we could take these seeds, plant them, and just keep watering them and dumping fertilizer on them. And here we are today. And the thing is, today, the U.S. knows that Taiwan separatism is unfeasible, and it's never officially supported it, but it still uses separatists as attack dogs to strengthen its position at the negotiation table with Beijing. So this is why I prefer to call it Taiwan separatism as opposed to Taiwan independence, because, does it sound like there's anything independent about any of this when it just in fact further cements Taiwan's position as a puppet of the U.S. deep state? But separatists will try and tell us that their movement was entirely grassroots and was the will of the people. It wasn't until I was a teenager that separatism became more popular. When the first DPP, so the DPP is the incumbent party, the Democratic Progressive Party, when the first leader from that party was elected in 2000, he won with only 39.3% of the vote. And it was because the blue camp was split. So when he was inaugurated, he had to promise the people here that he would make moves towards Taiwan separatism. And I remember back in the 1990s, everyone here in Taiwan called themselves Chinese back then. The people who go around screaming, "I'm Taiwanese, not Chinese," were quite rare until the late 2000s and the 2010s. And in 2008, a KMT leader, Ma Ying-jeou, was elected, so the party went back to the KMT for 8 years. And although I wouldn't say that he's the CPC puppet that separatists may come out to be, I think he was a little bit too soft on separatists. Direct flights between the two sides of the strait did resume, and mainlanders were allowed to travel to Taiwan, first with tour groups, then as individuals, whereas before then, when mainlanders first started visiting Taiwan in the early 2000s, they actually faced more restrictions than we as foreign tourists do in North Korea. Anyways, in 2014, Ma's administration, because his administration knew of the importance of positive relations with the mainland for the sake of the economy. Well, his administration tried to pass a trade deal called the Cross-Strait Service Trade Agreement, which is essentially the creation of a free trade zone between the two economies in service industries like banking, film, healthcare, and publishing. And this sparked what was basically a color revolution where student protesters occupied the parliamentary building and prevented this bill from passing. And this color revolution, called the Sunflower Movement, can be said to have birthed the latest iteration of the baizuo movement in Taiwan. So you had this new political party pop up. They called themselves the New Power Party, and they were basically the Squad in America, though the difference is they were nominally outside of the DPP, and they criticized the DPP, but at the most critical moments, they always vote in agreement with the DPP, kind of like how the Squad refused to force the vote. Anyways, notice how 2014, this year, it's the same year as the Umbrella Movement in Hong Kong and the same year as the Maidan coup in Ukraine. I mean, the first question is, do you think this was a coincidence? And also noteworthy is how the Congressional Progressive Caucus in recent years have met with leaders from Taiwan's incumbent party, the DPP. So what does this say about these leftists in general?
Well, that's a very interesting history. I actually was not familiar with a lot of those stories, but it's not surprising to me. You know, any of these stories you go into, you realize it's very messed up and devious on the surface, but when you get into the heart of it, you realize that, excuse me, that this is all. It's like what they say about communists, right? There's this notion in America that everything communists do is planned. They say, oh, it's a planned economy, it won't work. China's a planned economy, Soviet Union planned economy, that's why we can't have it. No. Well, yes, but no in the sense that it is not unique in being a planned economy. It's a planned economy for the workers. It's a planned economy for peace. What we have today in America and in the EU, the West as a whole, is a planned economy and a planned deep state for pursuing our imperialist ventures abroad. It's planned nefarious actions like this, like Maidan, which, you know, of course, you could look at 2004, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine as well, which was a prelude to the Maidan Revolution or the coup. It's also another notable thing that was happening around that time, you know, 2012-14 was some of the heights of the dirty war in Syria. So you had all this stuff going on at the same time, and that's Obama for you, I guess. You look at what he did and who he put into his cabinet and who he put in as the State Department secretary, and we can fully understand. I mean, these were young politicians in America who kind of came out of nowhere in a lot of cases. Obama, he magically became a U.S. Senator in Illinois, then magically after like one term finds himself running for president, I believe was the story. And of course, when you have things like that, this was not an organic rise of political power. Hillary Clinton was not an organic rise of political power. But when you have people like that, they're easy to compromise. And we know that they're not the ones calling the shots. We know that, 6 years prior to being in the White House, they probably couldn't point to Taiwan or to the Donbass or to Syria on a map or to Libya on a map. But then magically they get into power and they're assassinating Gaddafi. They're doing the sunflower, movement thing. They're doing the Maidan movement. They're doing all this crazy stuff, dirty war in Syria, funding ISIS, funding Al-Qaeda. So I think that what it says about American politics is not run by a deep civilization as you have in China or as Russia has. And that's something that Professor Zhang Weiwei said. He said, in America, you have this deep state, military industrial complex, corporate entities. In China, we have deep civilization, a people's conspiracy, as our friend Grayson put it. And I like that. But with America, it is a deep state that through various means takes advantage of these politicians, weaponizes them, and uses them to fulfill their goals. Same thing with the squad you mentioned. They rose to power saying, we are going to serve as a substantive challenge to the Democratic Party. These were very young women, 26, 27 years old when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected in New York to represent her congressional district of the Bronx and in Queens. And these people get into power. They say, we're going to do all these fantastic things. Then when it comes time to test how committed you are, whether you're going to stand on business, what do? They fold. They fold to the deep state each and every time. There are no exceptions. The only minor exception is, and again, this is not a full-throated endorsement of his policies, but the only minor difference is Donald Trump. Donald Trump, he had different policies that he wanted to pursue with Russia. He had some different policies. He wanted to get U.S. troops out of Syria, out of Afghanistan, out of Iraq, and frankly, I think that it's. He tried his best to not have to place this trade war against China, but he was convinced at the end of the day to do so by Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi in a backroom meeting. I don't know what was said or what happened, but he was convinced after fighting it for a very long time. But maybe you could answer this question for me. I think. There's a lot of Americans who are worried about Trump coming back in office because they're worried that, new trade war tipping off and accelerating with China would be bad would hurt American businesses that source goods from China. There's a lot of Americans who look at it and say, well, protectionist, trade policies are good. So you have a mixed bag in the United States. But what do you think about how China has reacted to it? Because I've heard some people in China who are worried about Trump coming back in. I've heard some people say, actually, Jackson, his trade policies helped the more patriotic nationalist sentiment of some factions in the country. So what do you think about it?
I think ever since the reforms and opening up, industry in China has had this sort of mentality, which is, if foreigners can make it better than we can for cheap, we'll buy it from them. And so for the longest time, China's chip industry lagged far behind the US. But as soon as the trade sanctions came in, Huawei could no longer get their chips fabricated by TSMC. What happened? China began pouring billions of dollars into the domestic chip industry. So I think it's the push and the shock that is needed for more economic and industrial self-sufficiency. Now, it's sad that it has to come through these sorts of measures. I think both peoples would benefit from friendly competition, which is why, you have Tesla in China, even though BYD is the domestic competitor. I mean, if China had this same sort of zero-sum mentality, you could easily just ban Tesla. So that's kind of my view on the situation. And going back to the topic of color revolution, it seems that, when you were talking about the different color revolutions, from the Orange Revolution in 2004 all the way to the Dirty Wars and I guess the Arab Spring and all that stuff that happened around the Obama years, it seems like a lot of it is just rinse and repeat, but refining over time. And this might sound crazy to a lot of people, but I think you'll kind of understand, which is, I think these sorts of tactics are beginning to be used more and more obviously in America to promote the interests of Wall Street as society becomes more divided. I mean, I followed the 2014 Sunflower Movement very closely, and quite a few of my friends and acquaintances participated in it. And because I'm involved in independent music here, it means I always have a close look at shitlibs over here. And it was then that it became really apparent to me that leftists, not communists by the way, but leftists are the preferred ideological stormtroopers, and extra-legal shock troops the imperialists like to mobilize nowadays to achieve their goals, which is why I thought it was very unwise for communists in the West to look to anti-Trump protesters in 2016 as a recruiting pool, when most of these people fit the bill of color revolutionaries. I mean, what did Trump say on the during his campaign, on the campaign trail, that pissed a lot of people off? I mean, okay, yeah, he said a lot of insensitive things about Mexicans and Muslims, but he also said a lot of good stuff, like how the U.S. should just quit NATO. I mean, I guess I'm a positive guy because I thought, hey, that's pretty base. I don't think it's going to happen. But the fact that he could rally so many supporters by saying we should get out of NATO because it's wasting money or whatever was a positive sign in my opinion. And it told me that a lot of his base has a more advanced consciousness than we give them credit for. And but anyways, I think what I'm trying to say is the U.S. ruling class tests color revolution tactics abroad first, as you've seen in Ukraine and Hong Kong. And then, I mean, you look at 2020 in America. I mean, some delusional communists might say the protests in 2020 would be the 1905 of America and pave the way for 1917. And for those who don't know, 1905 was a year a massive uprising took place in Russia but failed. And 1917 was the year the Bolshevik Revolution took place. But to me, it appeared like a domestic color revolution launched by one faction of the ruling class against another. I mean, did the Black Panthers ever receive $100 million in grants from the Ford Foundation, like Black Lives Matter did? Or I mean, look at how many Western volunteers in Rojava are also Antifa. It isn't to say that the average person who joined BLM protests were bad people or didn't have legitimate grievances, but a very common theme of color revolutions is, like you said, hijacking the momentum from existing discontent and directing them towards a target that the elites want to target.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the Maidan coup in 2014 was based upon legitimate, I don't want to say legitimate grievances, but it was a natural uprising. It was nowhere near as big as it became, and it was nonviolent at first. And you know, but eventually, yeah, you had Victoria Nuland handing chocolate chip cookies out at the protest, and you know, you had these Georgian snipers that killed all these police officers and protesters, and you had all these horrific things that began to develop until it finally led to the coup. And it's the same thing. You know, you look at Black Lives Matter. I talk to my friends who are even apolitical about it. And, you know, with TikTok nowadays, with social media, lots of average people are just beginning to wake up to, like, what is a psyop? What is a coup? They're learning these things even though they may not really care, because it is interesting when you have it before your eyes. It's educational and it's interesting. So one of my friends, he's not political, and he's like, bro, that whole Black Lives Matter, that was a full-on psyop. Like, that was like a domestic color revolution. I'm like, where are you talking about this from? Like, where's this coming from? But he's right. It was a domestic color revolution. And, you know, there's been a lot of these sorts of psyops. You look at, I think this whole climate crisis level thing, I mean, was something that I really honestly believed when I was younger. And then you begin to read the science, and obviously data can be manipulated in any sort of way. You begin to realize it's not really that conclusive. Like there's a lot of question marks that I think we should look at there. You look at the Me Too movement in the United States. They say believe all women. Well, that just doesn't make any sense. Why should we believe all women? That makes no sense. A lot of them are lying. Okay, you look at this phenomena. This is what I talked about when I was in Russia. I was in Russia. I was interviewing a woman named Yekaterina Mizulina, who is the head of Russia's Safe Internet League. She protects traditional values in Russia and also helps protect children from degenerate propaganda that the West tries to push on the Russian people online, on social media. And I said, what do you think about the fact that it's now 1 in 4 American youth claim to be LGBT? And she said, that's crazy. Like 1 in 4. She said, I don't know if they really know what that means. Like, I don't know if they're about it like that or if it's just a fad. But the fact that you now have a country where 1 in 4 people who are like 15 to 18 or whatever, they say they're of that sort of sexual perverted degeneracy. It's like, not only is that weird, not only is that like, how did that happen, but also, how do you continue to have a country and a population and sustain the levels of birth rates that we currently have if that's going to be our future? So I think there's a lot of psyops that are meant to, you said, promote the interests of finance capital. I think yes, but also even more so to just simply distract, create chaos, just like they do with all these proxy wars. The goal is to create chaos, division, make Americans hate their neighbors, blame their neighbors for their problems when it's not your Jewish neighbor, it's not your Venezuelan neighbor that is the source of all your problems. It's the people in power. So I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, when you have colleges teaching kids that white men are evil, is it really that subversive? Because realistically, you learn white men are evil. Who are the white men that you're going to go out and target? Are they going to be the people at BlackRock, or are they just going to be your working class neighbor? Right?
Exactly.
I mean, what's really interesting about these psyops and these color revolutions going back is you had outright right-wingers in the crowds, like the way you saw the Azov Battalion joining in the 2019 Hong Kong riots. But the bulk of the participants in the color revolutions call themselves leftists. And a lot of Zoomers and young millennials today embrace communism, well, their idea of what communism is, despite them misunderstanding communism as extreme radical liberalism and the kind of culture that you were telling the head of the Internet Defense League about. Meanwhile, you also have another faction of Gen Z that is attracted to neo-Nazism. And what's interesting is both of these groups tend to dislike us, which should say a lot about how they're being manipulated and psyoped to, at the end of the day, join forces against the same people that actually spread ideas that pose a threat to the establishment. So what do you think about this being the case?
Well, I think it's just people who are trying to find the problems in our country. And there's nothing bad about trying to find why you are suffering, why your family's suffering, why the country's falling apart. But the thing is, again, it's the goal of these 3-letter agencies to divide, distract, make us hate one another. When they're the ones, the CIA, Wall Street, these are the ones who are the source of our problems. So when I see people I say it's two sides of the same coin. You have people on the left who say straight white men are the problem, heterosexual men are the problem. That's insane to me, but it's just as insane as saying migrants are the problem or Jewish people are the problems, right? So I think that, of course, you could find any single straight white man or any single Venezuelan migrant or any single Jewish person, and that could be a good person or a bad person. There are a person who does good things, person who does bad things, or a mix, right? No one's a monolith in these groups. And so I think that it's two sides of the same coin, and really it's not, there's nothing. This is what I heard a good friend Eddie from Midwestern Mark say this week. He said, okay, let's hypothetically say that 100% of Wall Street, 100% of the Federal Reserve, 100% of the IMF, 100% of all these people and all the key decision-making positions at each of these institutions are Jewish, because there's this phenomena of like these, neo-Nazis rising saying that all Jews are the problems. And I think there's a lot of federal agents that are pushing that narrative to try and make Palestinian activists look bad. But let's just hypothetically say that that was the case. Okay, well, if you were to remove all of those people from all those positions of power and supplant them with, say, Indians or Nigerians, does that change the fabric of finance capital? Does that change the structures to which these institutions work? Does that change the way in which they're going to completely destroy our country and other countries across the world? No, it has nothing to do with them being this, that, or the other, straight white men, heterosexual men, or transgender. It's like, this is literally the liberal brain rot. They have this sort of brain rot on the right and the left, because on the other hand, you see like Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin are top, military manufacturing companies. They are putting trans and gay pride flags on our bombs and our fighter jets. They're saying, look at how great we are. We just appointed a transgender general in the military, something like that. It's the same exact thing. It doesn't matter who are in these positions. What matters is that these positions exist, that these institutions exist for the reasons that they do. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a really good point, and I honestly think the vast majority of the people, whether or not they identify as leftists or rightists, and even some of the more deranged people, I think most of them truly mean well. It's just there's unfortunately a lot of these smoke and mirrors out there that make politics very difficult to navigate. And what do most people want? They want dignified work for reasonable pay. They want to be able to provide for their families and have enough time for leisure and cultural development, and want their children and grandchildren to have the same but better. Now, on this topic, a lot of your detractors criticize you for being inconsistent over the years. But it's not like you flip-flop from being pro-Putin to pro-Zelensky every other day. And yes, you were a Bernie bro in the past, and you were a part of environmentalist circles, like you said earlier. And eventually this changed, and you're now critical of environmentalism as pushed by the elites. And I think a huge part of political development is realizing we were wrong about certain things and constantly adjusting our views as we gain new information. So can you briefly explain how and why your politics have evolved over the past years, and maybe some of the things you were wrong about in the past, like environmentalism?
Yeah, I mean, my politics changed because I'm not a fool, and only a fool doesn't change his views. I think that, I think that there's a lot of stones cast in my direction because I and our movement is so successful. I mean, Haz was talking about this last night, and it's not to be cocky or arrogant or anything like that, but I mean, in a very short amount of time, we've achieved pretty incredible things, and this is nothing in the scope of what we hope to accomplish. But I mean, it is worth taking a look at and kind of taking a moment to address what we've accomplished, and that's very frightening to a lot of people. So, for example, Candace Owens used to be a raging liberal when she was in college, I believe. So probably around my current age, maybe a little bit younger than me. So she used to be a liberal, but now she's gone on to work at the Daily Wire. She's one of the biggest voices in conservative media, but you don't really hear anyone condemning her for her previous views or saying she's changed her views, grifter, whatever, all these labels that leftists try to throw at me, and even some right-wingers try to throw at me. For what reason, I don't know, but I'd imagine it's because, though she is a popular voice, and I think she's brilliant, I I think that there's a difference between being a popular political commentator and a popular political commentator who's building a substantive political movement to challenge the orthodoxy, which is what we're trying to do. So yeah, I did change my views. I got interested in politics when I was in high school. I got interested because I lived like on the beach. I surfed every day. I saw my beaches were dirty. They had trash. Like the most polluted beaches in my whole state of California, where I grew up, were in my city. They got they go and do water testing on every beach in our home, in every beach in every city. Maybe like 8 beaches in each city, and our city would always get the most polluted. And that's not healthy. Like, we'd get sick all the time when we'd go out and surf. It was really bad. There'd be sewage going into the water. Sometimes you'd have to wait 3 days on end to go in the water. We also had a nuclear power plant. It was decommissioned, but they were storing all the nuclear waste there and releasing radioactive effluent into the water. So on those days, you couldn't go surfing for a few days either. So it was like really crazy growing up there. That sparked my interest in environmentalism. And while I still agree, I think we need to do our best to keep our home in order, as they say, and protect where you live. I think that because the people I was surrounded with, I kind of got in more of a ideological camp with it all, and people talking about climate change and people talking about different sort of like intersectional issues, right? And as a young man, this was all new to me. I was just kind of going along with it, but I wasn't too committed to any of it until the Bernie Sanders campaign came along. That's when I really started to get interested in like politics, because what he was preaching, and based on his record, I thought it was interesting. You have this guy who claims to be a social democrat, and he was saying that he was opposed to a lot of these wars. He also, like Trump, was skeptical about NATO, according to him, and he was skeptical about these wars in the Middle East. And obviously, he was a total cuck of the Democratic Party, and he was a liar, and I think he was just very weak, and he bent the knee at the end of the day, something Trump has refused to do entirely. Not refused to entirely bend the knee, but you know what I'm saying. Like,
he talk shit about the Republican Party if they screw him over, whereas Bernie he
hasn't completely caved in. Is what I'm trying to say. He didn't completely cave in. He's caved in a lot of ways, but not completely. Bernie Sanders caved in completely. Yeah. So I think that that's where I started. Anyways, long story short, when you see the people that you like sell out, you begin to realize that, oh, gee, maybe we need to chart a new course, a new path. And that's what we're trying to do. And the more that you grow up, begin to socialize, begin to travel, you begin to learn that a lot of the things that MSNBC and CNN and Fox News, for that matter, tell you about your fellow Americans and about Russians and Chinese and Moroccans or wherever you go, it's all a bunch of lies. And people everywhere are kind of similar. They're very nice everywhere I go. And I haven't had any the craziest realization I've had is that everyone who is not in positions of power are very similar to one another. We all have fairly similar goals, fairly similar desires. And when you learn that, the ideology of leftism, of this radical leftism that we have in America becomes very, irrational, illogical, antisocial, and something that you don't want to be a part of. So I guess that's why I saw people sell out, and I saw how irrational the grouping of these people and the ideas they push were.
While you've changed, you also haven't really changed, because what's consistent is you just keep on asking questions and looking for answers at the end of the day. And when you're talking about how most people in the world are fairly common and want the same things, and just a lot of the other things are distractions, how do you think communists should engage in the culture war without being trapped into it, like the way people like Matt Walsh and those at the Daily Wire just can't shut up about like gays and trans, for example. Like, how do we approach it? Because it is divisive, but we gotta. It's also how a lot of people make sense of politics.
Yeah, no, it is. You're right about that. And I've obviously taken a clear stance on these issues, but I think that, and it's a very traditional conservative stance. Look, I think that, I think at the end of the day, what we should be doing as communists is just embracing what is natural, right? Embracing what is natural is not a sin. It's basically what Russia has done. You know, Russia culturally is very similar to the United States. That's why I bring it up. But China also has tried to protect what is sacred and traditional. But Russia, you look at Russia and it's like, okay, they're not on 24/7 broadcasts like Matt Walsh or Ben Shapiro or whoever talking about like transgenderism and how evil it is. They simply say, oh, families are good. If you have a good family, hopefully you'll have a good home and a good neighborhood and a good, city and then a good county, state, country, so on and so forth. I mean, the family is the building block of everything else. If you have families that break down, your country's going to break down. So Russia says, okay, families, good. Yes, we should be pursuing traditional values, yes, okay. But this is just kind of a commonly understood thing in Russia, in China, in Africa, everywhere. This is commonly understood that like what is natural is best. Obviously, there's going to be random people who deviate in any country and pursue the extremes of these norms. But I do think that a lot of it in the United States is pushed in a way that is astroturfed. It's not real. Like I mentioned the conversation I had with Miss Mazzulina earlier, where I said 1 in 4 American youth in high school are identifying as LGBT. Well, frankly, they don't know what that means. Like they're not capable of understanding what love is, even, I'd imagine, for most all of them at that early age. You don't really know what it means to be LGBT. So how are you going to tell me that you are that? How are you going to tell me that you feel like you are born in a different body when you really don't know? So what I think is if there was a serious effort to stop pushing these sorts of degenerate ideologies on the masses, it really wouldn't be that much of an issue anymore. Racial things would still be an issue. Maybe gender, like insofar as man versus woman, women discrimination, those sorts of things would still be an issue between the left and the right, maybe. But I think even those issues would begin to calm down because everything that's being pushed right now is about division, and there's nothing natural about these weird gender phenomena. So I think we shouldn't necessarily be consumed with telling, we as communists should not necessarily be consumed with telling, trans people or LGBT people that they are inherently evil or something like that. I mean, I as a Christian think that they should repent and I think they should find God. But I think that at the end of the day, again, our beef is not with our neighbor. Our beef is with the people that are promoting these sick ideologies on the masses. And I think our country would be a lot more calm and stable if that wasn't happening. And I think we'd have stronger families if that wasn't happening. So my beef is not with the average Americans that maybe have been led astray in a dark time of their life and convinced that they're something they're not. My beef is with the people that are pushing these ideologies in universities, in corporations, in our elementary schools now. So that's what we need to fix.
I'm in agreement with you 100%, just positive reinforcement of the good things, and we have a saner environment in which we can discuss all other issues like a normal society where we're not all at each other's throats.
Yes.
It is quite concerning that the way that you're being targeted and the way you're being silenced, slandered, and receiving death threats. But I guess equally concerning is if you weren't receiving any sort of pushback at all. And I think a lot of deranged actors online who obsessively keep tabs on people they don't like are in many ways more disturbing than the feds, because at least with feds we understand that, hey, their incentive is they do their job and get paid.
Yeah.
And now you have people just going online, finding whatever information they can scour, and then they fill in the blanks with whatever makes sense to them. And then they spread slanderous claims and half-truths and try to knock you down without even getting to know you. Just like in this conversation, I learned so much about your political development, and it makes sense. And I know growing up in California and living in LA and having organized among liberals, it's not that far-fetched for you to have met celebrities. Yet I've seen people use pictures of you with celebrities as evidence that you're a plant by 3-letter agencies and that you're a grifter on top of that. And although I have a much smaller presence, I've had my fair share of dealings with those sorts of schizos saying this or that about me. You were actually involved because there was that photo of us taken with Haas and Daniel Burke at the Schiller conference. So that took place after I announced that I was coming back here to Taiwan to get ready for my conscription. And people were going batshit insane about it and saying, oh, see, he's a liar because he said he was going to do his conscription, but now he's meeting up with LaRouche cultists, so he was lying about everything. So it's like, yeah, just because my service doesn't begin the next day, like, what is it? Like, is it like checking into a hotel? I just start it whenever I want? Yeah. But, I mean, what do you have to say about, like, these crazy allegations and people just making up stories? And is there anything you want to clear up? I mean, the floor is yours.
It's not even worth giving it airtime, really. But what I'll say is that there's always going to be crazy people that are like obsessed with one personality or another. Like, I think there's other people that are maybe more fitting of the bill to be obsessed with. For example, like, I really like Tucker Carlson, right? I think he's a brilliant mind, very open-minded, and I think he should visit Shanghai if he's interested. I think it'd be, or China as a whole, I think it'd be really interesting for him. But anyways, what I'm saying is, like, his dad was FBI or CIA or something like that. So, when people are obsessed with him and saying, like, Tucker, your dad was this, and you tried to join the CIA when you were younger, it's like they make all these, probably, maybe some of it, I don't know, it's true, but some of it, like the conclusions they draw based upon those facts that he tried to join the CIA, his dad was CIA. It's like they could write a whole series of novels, these extravagant, like, AI prompted masterpieces about how Tucker's like this giant psyop. So, like, people come up with crazy stories like that. I don't think he's a psyop. I think he's just like a guy who had an interesting early life and found himself questioning a lot of what he initially assumed to be true. And, but anyways, with me, it's like my family's not political. None of my friends growing up were political. You brought up that I met celebrities. I mean, I haven't met too many celebrities in my life, but a few, I guess. And I think that when you're a public person, like, that's just kind of par for the course. You're going to meet people who are more important than you. It's like, so I don't know. But yeah, there are crazy accusations about me, and I guess people just have to see the truth unfold as it continues to do so. I mean, the one thing I will say is I find it very funny that there are some leftists who were putting out conspiracies about me, and I'm like, okay, so you put out these crazy stories about me, and then I go to China. I meet with very important people there. I go to Russia. I can't even say everything I did in Russia, but just know that any sort of agency in Russia has fully probably checked out every facet of my life.
They're not slackers.
Yeah, no, they are not slackers. If anyone's going to know whether someone's a Fed, it would be them. And then just yesterday, I was invited by the Prime Minister of Yemen to speak before the Houthis and all these senior military officials and whatnot and political officials. So I think that you have to let the material situation present itself, and the proof is in the pudding.
Very excellent attitude. Now, related to this, and we're almost done, but have you had opportunities to sell out? And if so, why did you turn them down?
No, I've never had anything like that, I don't think. I wear my opinions on my sleeve. So I think I've made it very clear about how dedicated I am to the cause, and it's life or death. If you want to achieve something that is immortal and something that is impactful for the rest of history, and really change people's lives in a way that will increase prosperity, make people happier, healthier, all that stuff, you got to be willing to sacrifice everything. And as I said in my speech to the Houthis yesterday, I said that true power only comes to those who are the most modest and the most humble, and victory and glory is reserved for those of us who are willing to sacrifice everything, even life itself, to achieve our noble aims. And so I think that there's no one who has in their right mind the thought that they. Although yesterday I did get a text yesterday from someone, and they're like, Jackson, if my friend's doing a new cryptocurrency coin, if you just comment under his post, he'll pay you $1,500. It can be anything, even I hate crypto. And I'm like, nah, I'm all good, So that was the one time I got reached out to by someone about doing something like that was yesterday.
Yeah, I think it's quite cynical for people to believe that popularity only comes from selling out. I guess we can say that you became big despite not selling out, but I'm more of a believer that you became big as you are today because you didn't sell out, since I think there is a genuine thirst among many people for alternative perspectives and answers to our questions. Going back to the theme of false dichotomies, I think people don't like to be trapped in this black or white way of thinking, which is why during the last election here in Taiwan, neither of the two major political parties got anywhere near 50% of the votes, for example. Now, bringing the conversation to this side of the Pacific for a bit, you recently made your first trip to mainland China, and I listened to your conversation with Haas about the trip afterwards on a stream. And what I really liked about the conversation was your attitude, and that you weren't really kissing Chinese ass, nor were you just talking about how great China is and how much you hate America for the state it's in, like right now. But you had this attitude of respect, admiration, and ultimately self-reflection. I mean, you looked at the differences between the state of China and the US and their separate trajectories, and you thought about how hardworking Americans deserve the same quality of life and conveniences as what you saw here in China, which kind of reminds me of when Deng Xiaoping visited Japan and the US early on in his leadership. I think it's, like I said earlier, healthy competition between the two countries would benefit both, but sadly, that's not what the U.S. ruling class wants. So what are just some of your biggest takeaways from your recent trip?
Well, I think you summarized it quite well. I was in awe when I visited of many things. Obviously, nowhere's perfect, but and I didn't see 99.99% of the country. I was just in Shanghai, right? But when I was there, and I think you can judge a lot about a country based on its major cities. Some people disagree with that. Some people say, no, that's not true. And there's an argument to be had. I mean, America definitely, I don't think, can be judged by the people in our major cities. I think they are not representative of the whole population. But as far as the infrastructure goes and like the basic fundamental building blocks of a major city, right, outside of the people, I do think that you can look at that in our major cities and say, okay, this is kind of, the rest of the country is going to be this, but worse, probably in a lot of ways. This, but less invested upon, which is true. So when I went to Shanghai, I think that I was I mean, it's kind of the same thing when you go to Russia. It's just like, first of all, when you walk around a place like that, and you know that you live in a country, I live in a country rather, that is, it's several hundred years old, and now I'm in China, I'm walking around a civilization that's thousands of years old. That alone is already a weird experience, just like it feels like you're walking around like I don't even know how to explain it. It's like when you go to the Sequoia forest in Central California and you're just walking around these trees that are like 1,000 or maybe not 1,000, 800, 900 years old. They're so old and like they're so tall. They got all these stories, all these people that have come and gone and animals that have come and gone. It's like that's kind of how you feel when you're walking around somewhere as historically rich as Shanghai. There's just so much to see everywhere you go, and it's clean. The infrastructure's good. There was some traffic, as there is in most major cities, right? But the food was very, very good. I love the food, actually. I have a heavy meat diet, so that's one thing. When I go to Russia, the food is amazing in Russia, but they don't really have that good. The meat is like steak, especially, is not that good. And when I was in China, there's actually a lot of meat, be it street food or be it the food that we had at restaurants. There was like a lot of lamb, really good. And the people were very welcoming, curious about Americans, and just like I wasn't surprised by that, but I was thinking this is probably what it's going to be, and it was. And overall, there was just a lot of prosperity. I didn't see homeless people. I didn't see like crack addicts. I didn't see crime everywhere. I went through like a lot of different forms of transportation, and it was all clean. And those are the basic things that everyone should need and want in a major city. And we don't have that in America. It's a shame. We used to have something closer to that, and I hope we can achieve that again someday soon.
Yeah. You know what one of my favorite things about Shanghai is, how on the Bund, there's a bunch of grand foreign-looking buildings that used to be part of the international settlement, which was a symbol of national humiliation and foreign dominance. The buildings are still there, but on top of them is the Chinese flag, and I feel like that's a much more beautiful image than just knocking them down because we don't want to face the dark past. It's more like, no, there was this dark past, but we overcame it, and now we have something that's beautiful. And I think that's an attitude that it goes to show how civilizations and cultures and nations and countries are living, and they're not just static. And I think that's knowing this reality might make it easier for some in the West to understand why, although they do not like the state of their country now, they still have a stake in it, and that it is a beautiful thing to do to fight for its improvement. Now, since I just spoke about Western communists and people in the West, my final question to you, Jackson, is for my listeners in America, and it's, what are 3 things every American communist should have down?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question because it's an important one. I think that a better way of phrasing it, what are 3 things every American communist should have down or do, right? And it's like, for starters, let's see if we can break it down into 3 things, because I was kind of toying with what I thought were the 3 most important things. For starters, I would say to be able to speak in a way that the layman understands. That's so important. And it kind of goes with being socially normal and not being an antisocial, complete nerd that just either reads all day or sits on their computer all day, So I think being able to communicate in a way that people understand it. And the way that Haas and I have attempted to boil down what we are trying to do in a single sentence, while recognizing the failures of the AOC wing of the left and the failures of the right wing, is by saying we are working on building a country a patriotic, historically rich country that focuses on the industrialization of our economy while prioritizing the needs of the people. It's as simple as that. So that's one thing. Another thing is to be physically fit, healthy, and if you can, in good spirits and relations with your family and your friends. I think that's very important as well. As I said earlier, a good family is the building block of a good country. When families break down, you have problems. Obviously, not everyone can be in good terms with their families for various reasons, but if you can, stay in touch with them and just like be with them and stuff and be normal with them. Being normal is a theme. Being normal and being educated is a theme with all of these. Now, the third one I'll say, in terms of education, besides the obvious of learning from the greats, the figureheads or the heads, the brains of communism, the last one I would say is travel. Because this is something that Colonel Douglas McGregor, Trump's former senior advisor to the Pentagon, told me. I said, what's one thing that you could impart upon a younger generation that wants to improve the leadership that is so lacking in Washington, D.C. today? And he said travel. He said he learned a lot about the world when, I think he went to like high school or boarding school in Germany, and he traveled all across the world. Obviously, he took part in Desert Storm, but he's traveled to a lot of other places. And I can say that when he told me that, I didn't have a passport. My passport was expired. I think it expired during the pandemic, and I really hadn't traveled a lot of places. And now, this year especially, over the last 12 months or 6 months, I'm trying to travel as much as possible. I've been to China, I've been to Morocco, I've been to Russia, and I've been speaking with a lot of people from all across the world, getting these connections. When you begin to travel, and you go to these events, these international events, you also meet people from like either Lebanon or from Gaza or from Yemen, and you are they impart a lot of wisdom on you in that process as well. So traveling is the last thing I'd say that is so important.
So basically, be normal, take care of your body, mind, spirit,
yes,
and maintain good ties with your family, and never stop learning and travel.
Very good.
Yes. All right. So I think that about wraps up our interview for today. And thank you very much for your time. I know you have a very busy schedule, and for just giving these so well thought out answers that I feel our audiences will find really interesting. Hopefully, I hope they do. I'm actually looking forward to editing this. So are there any closing remarks you'd like to give, or just anything you want to plug?
No, I mean, just, follow me on Twitter. Everyone, I think, knows my Twitter. If you don't, it's just Jackson Hinkle with 2 L's. And I'm releasing, like I mentioned a few times on this stream, actually. It was just a fantastic conversation. The conversation I had with Ekaterina Mizulina, fantastic woman. I'm releasing that interview today, so by the time this video comes out, it'll be published and you guys can check it out. Highly suggest everyone watch that in tandem with the interview I did with Saharova in Russia. So thank you for having me on. I enjoyed the conversation thoroughly. I learned a lot, and I wish you the best of luck with this program in the future.
Thanks a lot for your well wishes, and it's been exciting seeing you grow over the years, and this year is off to a very successful start. So I can't wait to see what the future holds for you, for Infrared, and for all of us who are just fighting for the truth to build a better world. So yeah. So that concludes my interview with the one and only Jackson Hinkle. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Straight Talk. And for more talks like the one you just heard, don't forget to like and subscribe on your preferred listening platform, as well as on YouTube and Rumble, and share with your friends who may be interested. If you have any feedback or topic suggestions that fit the theme of this podcast, please send an email to straighttalk@xiangyu.tw. I'd now like to give a huge thank you to my upper-level patrons, Alvin, Megapatriot, Yijing, and Pranav. Finally, if you like what I'm doing and want to support me sharing a perspective on Taiwan and beyond not covered by mainstream media, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon or making a one-time donation to any of the links in the show notes. See you guys in the next episode.
讲，还是人情。